Hello and good evening everyone. It's 5:25. We'll begin in another 5 minutes time. All right, hello everyone. It's 5:30 and we are ready to start. Let's get started. Just give me another minute to let more people who are joining us in. So we'll get started in another minute's time. Let me just let them into our space and we'll get started soon. All right.
Good evening,
Most
sir.
good evening, Jennifer. It's close to 60 people in the house. I think it's time. Let's get started. And hello, everybody. Welcome to another session on MEG2. And today and tomorrow, we are going to deal with uh, the largest tragedy, or the longest tragedy written ever by William Shakespeare, named Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark.
Hello,
So
I can
today
see
we'll be
you.
dealing. Sorry,
I can see you. I can see you.
that's because my cam is off.
Okay, okay, fine,
I
fine.
shall
Thank you.
turn that on shortly. Don't worry. My cam is off. You'll be able to see me shortly. Don't worry. So, yeah, I'm taking a couple of minutes so that others can also join. There are latecomers generally in our group, maybe because they are busy with a lot of things. They join a couple of minutes late. So, there are people who are still coming in. So, I am just letting them in as well. We are close to a 70 now. All right, more coming in. All right. So today we'll be dealing with Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark, and it is one of the most iconic plays of William Shakespeare, one of the most discussed, one of the most debated. Um, Across the ages, it has remained one of the most canonical cult plays. All right. So before we get started, a couple of background info from here and there would definitely be befitting to the situation. So by the time others join, let's spend a couple of minutes or five speaking about a few historical facts. William Shakespeare, as I've told you in my previous classes, there has always been ongoing debates as to whether William Shakespeare ever existed or not. There are quite a few putative theories about his existence. There are people who argue that he is Christopher Marlowe or Francis Bacon or Queen Elizabeth in disguise. But despite that, there are also people who believe that the genius did exist and his genius is undebatable or unquestionable. To such an extent that Matthew Arnold, the Victorian poet, wrote a poem titled On Shakespeare. Most of you may have studied that poem during your school days. In the play, in the poem On Shakespeare, Matthew Arnold writes that uh, uh, he praises William Shakespeare, and towards just give me a second. Too many people sneaking in. Let me just let them in. I'm sorry for the interruption. Uh, Quite a few people trying to join. Just give me a second. I'm sorry. All right then. So Matthew Arnold in that poem on Shakespeare begins by saying, "Others abide our question, thou art free. We ask and ask, thou smilest and art still, out-topping knowledge." So the way he begins that poem is by saying that uh, there are so many people who point a finger at you. There are so many people who doubt your genius. There are people who doubt your existence. But you simply stand and smile. Thou smilest and art still out-topping knowledge. This is how Matthew Arnold describes Shakespeare. And if you ask me why is it so, the answer is very simple. Uh, in photographs, uh, you can see people smiling. That is, William Shakespeare is long dead, and because he's dead, and the interpretations of his plays or works are made by critics, uh, it's not practically possible to speak about the whether Shakespeare really meant this or that or what. So that's the reason why Arnold says so. But it's also because he's a lofty genius, and because he's a legend, he need not answer anybody's stupid skepticism. And yeah, so some bare minimal facts. He's written close to 37 plays. This is just a tentative thing. There may be still plays which are yet to be discovered. The figures may change. He has written 37 plays, 154 sonnets, two long poems, Venus and Adonis and Rape of Lucretia, and most of his works were published posthumously. That is, while he was alive, none of his works were really published in a standard format. It was after his death that his sonnets as well as plays were published. And that's why you would come across two technical terms at some point of time. One is quarto, and the other is folio. All right. So you will come across these terms, quarto editions and folio editions. Quarto editions are clandestine editions. നമ്മൾ വ്യാജ സി ഡി എന്നൊക്കെ പറയുന്ന പോലെ there are people who watch plays and they take the notes down and they publish it anonymously, or to make some quick bucks. They may not be depended on, because when you listen to a play and write fast, there can be possibilities that your transcription can go wrong. It's not the authentic version. Whereas the folio edition is an edited, a compiled one. So the folio editions of Shakespeare was published posthumously. And if I remember correctly, it was in the year 1632. That is 16 years after Shakespeare's death. And his sonnets were published by Thomas Thorpe. And first folio, I'm sorry, it was published in the year 1623 by Hemingway Condell, Condele. So it was published in the 1623, 7 years after Shakespeare's death. So most of these works were published posthumously, as I told you. And Those who believe that Shakespeare was there identify him to be a Catholic. And in a Protestant England or a Presbyterian England, it was difficult to live as a Catholic. They were denied of various rights, including rights to assemble for prayers, and they had to pay taxes. But despite that, Shakespeare survived, and he was one of the most richest writers to have ever graced this earth. And in uh, he started as a playwright in the Globe Theatre, and he started as a playwright in the Globe Theatre, and he became so rich that later he was fortunate to buy that theatre himself. And also, we must note that at a latter point of his career, the Globe Theatre burnt down during a historical plays performance. And despite the theatre being put to fire, Shakespeare died rich. So that's the amount of wealth that Willie Shakespeare made out of playwriting. And that's why we still regard him as a legend. That's one of the reasons why we still regard him as a legend. Initially, the patronage of Queen Elizabeth, and from 1603 onwards, the patronage of King James also played a pivotal role in encouraging William Shakespeare as a playwright. We must remember that his troupe was also called as King's Men ever since King James took their patronage in 1603. And we must also bear in mind that he has experimented with various kinds of genres. He wrote comedies, he wrote history plays, he wrote tragedies. Then there are these plays called problem plays or dark comedies. He also dared to mix two genres, and he created what may be called as tragicomedies. So he also wrote romances. So when you say 37 plays, he has extensively played with varied genres. He did not stick to any single particular genre. And wherever he touched or whatever he touched turned gold, whether it's historical plays or comedies or sonnets or tragedies, all of them were instant hits. And we still remember most of them, and several of them are adapted even in the modern era. And I did tell you about quarto and folio because they are two technical terms that you need to be aware of. And this is something that you need to be aware of. And what is a quarto and what is a folio is a question that I shall come back to at a later point of time today. Just in case I forgot to say that, please remind me. No, the audio is there. The audio is connected. Aren't you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, great.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. I shall turn my camera on. Don't worry about that. I have kept it off for a few reasons. I shall definitely turn my cam on in a while from now. I just want this background info to be in a non-video format, and that's why I am giving you these descriptions with my cam off. So the point I'm trying to say is William Shakespeare has experimented with a lot of forms, and he attained success in all those areas. And more often than not, there is a statement that goes popularly in the literary circles. You may have heard these arguments before. There is a saying that if there is a paper called Shakespearean Studies or Shakespearean Plays for that sake, and if two people go to write this exam, one is William Shakespeare himself, the other is A.C. Bradley, who's one of the noted critics of William Shakespeare. Yeah. So imagine these two people go to write a paper on Shakespearean studies. The joke in the academic circle goes that William Shakespeare will fail in the paper, and A.C. Bradley or any other critics of Shakespeare would secure rank. And if you're wondering why it is so, the simple answer is that Shakespeare wrote his plays only to make money. Shakespeare was least bothered about its implications. It's just like If Malayali people would need to get a better example, think about the movies of Renjit or Renji Panikar, for instance. Renjit during one point of time, or Renji Panikar during one point of time, used to make movies which catered to the highly patriarchal, entertaining audience in Kerala. Most of the movies of Mohanlal, for instance, they were highly commercial in nature. For example, in a movie like Narasimham, where Mohanlal says that I need a girl to take care of me when I come home drunk and to stamp somebody. That's absolutely male chauvinistic and that's misogynistic. But then there were a large group of audience who would clap for that, and that attributes to the revenue of the filmmaker. So there were people like Renji Panikar or Renjit who ventured out, or so many of those who ventured out on writing such mass movies. Similarly, William Shakespeare's primary intention was also to make some money out of playwriting or script writing. And seldom did he think about the socio-political implications of his plays. And as I told you, there are so many critics who actually interpret most of his works. Just a second, there are a few comments coming in. I'm just addressing that as well. It's okay, Nitya Menon. There's no need to be sorry about it. It happens. And that's why all his work we got to know after his death. I didn't get the question, Riddhi. What is it that you are referring to? Riddhi?
Good evening. As you were saying that he was busy earning bucks, so that is why we are just able to know about his work later on uh, from other critics or from like other poet with their
Uh,
own interpretation.
Riddhi, the description is pretty simple. Do not overthink about it. The concept is
So are
very
you getting
simple.
my voice?
Yeah. Can't you hear me? I'm replying you. Hello, Riddhi. Am I audible?
Hello, am I audible?
Hello. Yeah, I can hear you. Am I audible?
You both are audible, sir. Please carry on.
Okay. Thank you, Ashish. So I was trying to say that do not overthink about that. The simple fact is that William Shakespeare was not a literary person. He never thought when he wrote his plays that centuries later, generations of students, especially literature students, would brood on his plays and abuse him or swear at him. He never thought that. He didn't write plays for us to consume it or to study it. He wrote plays to be performed during his times and to make some money. And because he did not attach any literary value to his plays, it was not published during his time. There were publications, like I told you, there were clandestine quarto publications. Quarto means there were people who would go and sit in Shakespeare's plays performance. They would scribble down the dialogue spoken by the characters. So there might be a lot of missing links in that. For example, if a character's name is not uttered in stage, the one who is copying down would give a fictitious name to that character or write a dash. So that character may have a name actually, but the writer may not give it a name. And dialogues can be misinterpreted. We all know that there are so many words in English which has different spellings, WHERE and WERE. Yeah, so that could be misspelled by the translator or the copywriter. So that was a problem with the quarto editions. Nonetheless, Shakespeare did not bother to challenge any of them. Shakespeare did not bother to charge a legal suit against any of them. But then he was not bothered, or he was not aware of the implications of publication. Only later, after his death, was his plays compiled together and published. And now, when we look back at it, it is a literary, what do you call, a literary boon, because we have those books, those plays archived, and we can go back to the somewhat original version or a dependable version. And that is why Shakespeare was not aware of that, maybe perhaps. All right. So speaking about his, no, where did I deviate from? I was speaking about something else. Mm, Yeah, so when Shakespeare wrote his plays, he did not think about its implications, socio-political implications. What he wrote was what would mean to him some money. And it was his later critics. I'm not speaking about immediate survivors, because I told you the book was published in 1623. But then most of the studies came after the 18th century. Yeah, that's why I said Anjumol, he did not publish any of his writings. He was not into publishing. He was a playwright. He was a dramatist. And that was his area of interest. And if I can digress another minute on this regard, just to give you a clarity, a conceptual clarity, while studying English literature, another thing that you need to keep in mind, especially when you learn literary criticism and theory, for instance, is that none of these critics or theoreticians belong to the English background. At least most of them do not belong to the English background. For example, you speak about Jacques Derrida, who created a concept like deconstruction. Derrida is a French philosopher. He has nothing to do with literature. But because his speech on deconstruction can be applied to literary studies as well, we conveniently drag him into a theoretical fold. Same applies with Plato and Aristotle. They were philosophers. We also know them as mathematicians. They have nothing to do with English literature. But because they have written treatises on drama, we take Aristotle's theories of tragedy for study. But he is not a literary person. And he wrote in Greek. And Greek has nothing to do with English literature. But because his concepts of theater can be multidisciplinary, we learn those theories in English as well. So same applies there. So most of these people have a non-English background. If you closely examine that. All right. So speaking about Shakespeare's critics, it was they who studied, defined, and gave various interpretations to Shakespeare's plays as they are given now. So, for example, there are so many people, critics, who accuse Shakespeare of misogyny. Most of the Shakespearean female characters come into attack, scathing attack. But when Shakespeare wrote those plays, it was a too casual approach. For example, in Hamlet, you would come across a lot of innuendos. What are innuendos? In Malayalam, we say Dvayartha Prayogangal, sexual innuendos. Yeah. For example, in the play within the play in Hamlet, Mousetrap scene, there is the state where Hamlet lies in the lap of his lover, Ophelia, and he comments to Ophelia's character, "Oh, I could feel your penis, Ophelia." And mind you, penis is a male thing. A female cannot have a penis generally. So what Shakespeare was referring to there is that the character played by Ophelia was by a youngster, a teenager, a boy. As I told you, there was no female characters or female actresses, for that sake, during the Shakespearean times. So it was the teenage boys who used to play the female characters. So the stage burst out into immediate laughter. So that served as a sort of a comic relief. And that's why he uses such things. And more often than not, people who came to watch his plays were commoners. You know, farmers, people who go to work, coolies who come at night to watch his performance, half drunk. So they prefer watching some violence on stage or some sort of abuse on stage. When a character beats his wife, they relish in that. Whether it's misogyny or not is a theoretical discussion. But nonetheless, Shakespeare filled his plays with such scenes because that excited his audience and they were approving of that. And that bought him some money. And that's why we can see traces of misogyny in his plays. Similarly, whatever concepts, for example, Oedipus complex in Hamlet, these are all accusations made by critics. While Shakespeare wrote his plays, he would have seldom thought of the existence of Oedipus complex in his play, for instance. We don't know because Shakespeare no longer is there. Otherwise, we could have asked him. But nonetheless, most of the interpretations comes from the critic's side, and we can't be sure that Shakespeare meant it when he wrote it. All right, so let's quickly get started with Hamlet. And before we get started, let's have a brief discussion. I had told you yesterday that we'll discuss Hamlet today and tomorrow, and I had asked you to read at least a bare minimal summary and come to the class. So let me see, how far have you read? What happens in the play? What is the play all about? If any of you can take turns, unmute yourself and speak.
Sir, Foster sell his soul in to devil.
No,
In the
Hamlet,
story.
Hamlet. I'm sorry if I said Faustus. I said Hamlet. What happens in Hamlet?
Hamlet is it is within the story. Uh,
Yep. Hello.
Hamlet is all about the protagonist whose name is Hamlet himself, whose who's a king, is murdered, and in his stead, his brother comes into the throne and marries his mother. And Hamlet is in a dilemma. He wants to prove that his father has been murdered because there's some other instances also where the ghost is cut, ghost of the father.
Uh-huh.
A lot of drama, the drama within a drama, and then that's about it, I guess, and how he proves himself right towards the end.
By taking revenge. Yeah. All right. Nonetheless, in the comment box also there are people who say story of revenge. In fact, it's a play of deaths. Almost all the principal characters in the play meets a horrible end. There are very few surviving characters, and it is in a sense a depressing play. So comment most of the learners. After reading Hamlet, there are people who say, "Why is this after all prescribed for study?" To be or not to be is one of the popular soliloquies that we discuss more often than not, and it comes to the fore. We have to discuss why is this play prescribed for study? Why at this age? Forget your case. You are a group of mixed age. If a learner of regular MA, say 22, 23 years old, comes across this play, that person would feel so depressed, full of death and full of indecision, full of inactivity and everything. In a way, this is waiting for Godot, isn't it? Nobody comes, nothing happens, nothing goes. Yeah. So similarly, there is a moment where Hamlet is asked to take revenge, and till the end of the play, he procrastinates and procrastinates and procrastinates, and nothing really happens. So, how would you assess this play, or why should you be studying this play? These are all questions that comes forth. So, before we proceed any further with the story of the play, the reason why I say the story of the play is I'd like to share with you an entirely different perspective about the play. I know most of you would have read the summary. If you haven't read the summary, even then, I'd be giving you a Hamlet in commonsensical way. If read commonsensically, Hamlet would make complete sense. Again, before we begin, I'm gonna share quite a few technical terms with you. You may Google that and figure that out by tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll have another discussion on Hamlet. Again, to split these two sessions, just in case you want to. Today we are going to do an overview on Hamlet's story, why he's doing certain things in a certain way. And tomorrow we'll be talking about the critics, the critical interpretations of Hamlet, because that's what you will have for your question, your exams, most probably. So this is how it's divided. So tomorrow we'll discuss these technical terms too in detail. So I'm sharing a few technical terms with you: procrastination and peak disposition. Then you have words like objective correlative, etc. So you may go back and have a look at these terms, which might be useful for you. Soliloquy is a term that we got familiar with yesterday. We'll discuss that as well. I'm not going to analyze all the soliloquies for you. I'm sure Google would do that for you. And the problem with taking soliloquy for analysis is we can't wind this up in 4 hours. 4 hours in itself is too much. We get only 20 hours, that is 10 sessions. And taking 2 sessions out of it for a play is criminal. So anything more than 2 is even more criminal. But because you can't complete Hamlet in 2 hours, I have to take 3 to 4 hours. Apologies for that. But again, one more thing that you need to keep in mind, because yesterday there were so many people who commented about teaching in detail, that to keeping annotations in mind. So there are 2 things I'd like to remind all of them. I keep telling from my first class, this is on record, and I mean it. You can verify it with anybody in the regional center or study center or headquarters. We at IGNO are called academic counselors, and our purpose is not to teach you anything. For example, if I teach you, if at all I teach you 2 plays and say that's it for 20 sessions, nobody is going to come and ask me, why didn't you teach 8 plays or 10 plays? Because we are not expected to teach. The academic counseling sessions are meant for discussion, clearing your doubts, helping you write your assignments, etc. It's not meant for lecture per se. But all of us, or at least almost all of us, do that because we are considerate about you. And we do understand the drawbacks of distance learning, wherein you need somebody somewhere to feed and give you pointers. And in my sessions, that's what I try to do. I give you umpteen amount of resources, which I call as pointers, to go back to, refer to, and learn. And at any point of time, if you can come back and have queries, we can have discussions on that line as well. And that's another thing that you need to keep in mind. You take any university syllabus for MA, any college, they have 3 plays in a module, suppose. And these 3 plays have to be transacted in 16 hours. Even if you make a mathematical division, it takes, say, 6 hours per play. For 18 hours, I'm sorry, it's not 16, it's 18 hours for 3 plays. So it's 6 hours per play. And because we are cramped for time in IGNO, I am somewhat trying to complete the plot or the basic discussions in 2 hours, which in itself is a demanding task. Please don't think that I'm having a cakewalk, sitting behind a machine, simply saying something and going. That's not the case. If I have to talk to you for 2 hours, I have to prepare for, say, 5 to 6 hours. Say, once our class is over, after my dinner, what I do is I sit till 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, preparing these things for you. And when I come back, it's really a difficult thing to summarize all this in 2 hours. And in a way, being teachers, we are accustomed to talking nonchalantly. And to sum it up for 2 hours is a crime to one's own passion and profession. But then we understand your dilemma, and that's why we try to somewhat chip in a moderate path. So kindly bear with us. So speaking about the play, as I told you, most of you might be familiar with the story, but then I'd like to play a small video for you, a very small video. And after you complete watching that video, I'll come back and begin Hamlet for you. And as I begin Hamlet, I'll have 2 questions for you. So as you watch this video, irrespective of whether you have read the summary or the play or you are new to Hamlet, I urge you as you watch this video to keep 2 questions in mind. I'll come back to those 2 questions once that video is over. The video has nothing to do with that questions. The 2 questions are simple questions. One is, who is Hamlet? It's a question to be treated seriously. Question number 1 is, who is Hamlet? And question number 2 is, where or when does the play begin? You may find it to be really simple questions, but nonetheless, have answers for this. We'll come back and discuss. I'm going to share my screen with you and show you another interesting TED-Ed video. And the reason why I'm showing this video is, just in case you are aware of the proceedings in our universities and colleges over the last 10 years, the choice-based credit semester system was implemented. Most of the colleges are becoming autonomous, which means they can prefer their own syllabus. They can prepare their own syllabuses. As you know, Hamlet has been there as part of the PG course, whatever syllabus you take over the last 5 decades, minimum. But then, if you look at most of the syllabuses made for MA English over the last 5 years, one text that is conveniently taken out of the academia is Hamlet. Reasons are plenty. I mean, it's an old dusted thing. People have learned it. Everybody knows it. It's a dull play. It's a long play, so it's difficult to teach it in 3 months. Semester system, mind you. And our students feel depressed after learning that. There are plenty of arguments for throwing Hamlet out of the academia. But then, is Hamlet required? Is a question that we have to come back to. So before that, I'm sharing my screen. We'll watch this and we'll come back.
Who's there? Whispered in the dark, this question begins a tale of conspiracy, deception, and moral ambiguity. And in a play where everyone has something to hide, Its answer is far from simple. Written by William Shakespeare between 1599 and 1601, Hamlet depicts its titular character haunted by the past but immobilized by the future. Mere months after the sudden death of his father, Hamlet returns from school a stranger to his own home and deeply unsure of what might be lurking in the shadows. But his brooding takes a turn when he's visited by a ghost that bears his father's face. The phantom claims to be the victim of a murder most foul and convinces Hamlet that his uncle Claudius usurped the throne and stole Queen Gertrude's heart. The prince's mourning turns to rage, and he begins to plot his revenge on the new king and his court of conspirators. The play is an odd sort of tragedy, lacking either the abrupt brutality or all-consuming romance that characterize Shakespeare's other work in the genre. Instead, it plumbs the depths of its protagonist's indecisiveness and the tragic consequences thereof. The ghost's revelation draws Hamlet into multiple dilemmas. What should he do? Who can he trust? And what role might he play in the course of justice? These questions are complicated by a tangled web of characters, forcing Hamlet to negotiate friends, family, court counselors, and love interests, many of whom possess ulterior motives. The prince constantly delays and dithers over how to relate to others and how he should carry out revenge. This can make Hamlet more than little exasperating, but it also makes him one of the most human characters Shakespeare ever created. Rather than rushing into things, Hamlet becomes consumed with the awful machinations of thinking itself. And over the course of the play, his endless questions come to echo throughout our own racing minds. To accomplish this, Shakespeare employs his most introspective language, from the usurping king's blazing contemplation of heaven and hell to the prince's own cackling meditation on mortality. Shakespeare uses melancholic monologues to breathtaking effect. This is perhaps best exemplified in Hamlet's most famous declaration of angst. To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them. This monologue personifies Hamlet's existential dilemma of being torn between thought and action, unable to choose between life and death. But his endless questioning raises yet another anxiety. Is Hamlet's madness part of a performance to confuse his enemies? Or are we watching a character on the brink of insanity? These questions weigh heavily on Hamlet's interactions with every character, and since he spends much of the play facing inward, he often fails to see the destruction left in his wake. He's particularly cruel to Ophelia, his doomed love interest who is brought to madness by the prince's erratic behavior. Her fate is one example of how tragedy could have been easily avoided and shows the ripple effect of Hamlet's toxic mind games. Similar warning signs of tragedy are constantly overlooked throughout the play. Sometimes these oversights occur because of willful blindness, such as when Ophelia's father dismisses Hamlet's alarming actions as mere lovesickness. At other points, tragedy stems from deliberate duplicity, as when a case of mistaken identity leads to yet more bloodshed. These moments leave us with the uncomfortable knowledge that tragedy evolves from human error, even if our mistake is to leave things undecided. For all these reasons, perhaps the one thing we never doubt is Hamlet's humanity. But we must constantly grapple with who the real Hamlet might be. Is he a noble son avenging his father, or a mad prince creating courtly chaos? Should he act or observe, doubt or trust? Who is he? Why is he here? And who's out there, waiting in the dark? Here's a question for you. Do you prefer Shakespeare's comedies or his tragedies?
All right. So time has come for us to address this question. Who is Hamlet? And as I told you earlier, as a starting point, we have to identify where does the play begin. Let's get started with the first question. Who is Hamlet? Yep, we have a few answers coming in the chat box. He is the Prince of Denmark. Okay, I'd still keep asking, who is Hamlet? I'll keep asking who is Hamlet today until you come up with the answer that I am looking forward to.
Sir, I
Yes,
don't have
please.
much knowledge about Hamlet, but as I see in this video, I found that Hamlet represents the whole youth of all generations
Mm-hmm.
because
How come?
because all the things he faces and his dilemma represents what the youth face every time.
Mm-hmm.
In all generations, the youth face the same things about his destination or destiny, about relationships and the things happening around him and all. Means sometimes he thinks that there should be bloodshed, or sometimes he feels like the world should be more about love, or sometimes the world is not a place to live and all.
Uh-huh. Nonetheless, we do have answers in the chat box as well. There are people who say he is the Prince of Denmark. He is the protagonist of the play. He is son of King Hamlet. There are people who say he is the Prince of Denmark, the titular character and the protagonist, about 30 years old. The tragic hero, he's a deep thinker. And he's ourselves. That's a better answer, Jennifer. I like that. We have two sides within ourselves, which is always at war, the good and the bad. But then, doesn't Foster's have the same too, the good and the bad conflict? Okay, I'll let you think about that. Prince of Denmark, well educated and having reputation among the people. Hamlet is every human being who's a liminal space. Great, guys. Good for a start. Wonderful. I'm so excited to meet you today. And as we meet today, apart from the fact that you have become more articulate, we can see so many answers coming in the chat box. I like that word, Vijay, eponymous. That's a word I taught you a couple of days before. And I'm really glad that you're putting into use. So he is an eponymous hero. But apart from all this, I'm really glad with the realizations or findings that you guys have come up with. Yep. Who is Hamlet? Is a question that we need to address first before we think about anything else. Who's Hamlet? This is a very significant question. Whatever you have said in the chat box is true. Hamlet is the Prince of Denmark. Hamlet is somebody who's asked to avenge his father's death, and that wholly consumed and destroyed him. Good observations, Sri Lakshmi. And there is another answer. When I keep I ask this question almost every year, and whenever I pose this question to my bunch of students, there are a wide range of answers that I come across. You guys have covered almost all of that, but one interesting observation that my students otherwise make is something that you guys have missed upon. Hamlet is, quite coincidentally, Hamlet's father too. Please never forget that the name of Hamlet's father is also Hamlet. So there is this King Hamlet and there is this Prince Hamlet. So we have two Hamlets in the story, mind you. But nonetheless, that's okay. That's not what I wanted to know. But I would also like to problematize this a little bit. Somebody has said in the comment box that Hamlet is a 30-year-old or 31-year-old guy. I would like to ask you the question back, throw the question back at you. How old do you think is Hamlet? How old is Hamlet? Yeah, just in case you are stuck in a lockdown and you are feeling you're missing some of those sceneries. Even I can't go out. I've been, okay, I'll come back to that later. Okay, somebody as old as man himself. Then I'm speaking about age. How old is he? For example, you may be 22, 23, 30, 35, 40, 45. How old is Hamlet? What makes you say 16, Anu? Shanti
Around
says
25.
teenager. Okay. What makes you say 25? No, I'm just
Because of his
asking you back so that you could think.
but one doubt. Even if he's above the age of 20, then why he didn't become the successor of his father as a king? Why Claudius become a
You
king?
tell me. You tell me. If he is about
That is
20,
the
why didn't he become?
uh, that that
Okay,
is the
we are coming
question.
to that. Don't worry. Don't worry. We are coming to that. Don't worry. Okay. So speaking about Hamlet, that's where I'd like to begin with. You believe it or not, most of you were right in that regard. Hamlet is a teenager. He's not 16. Ophelia is 16. Hamlet is not 16. But he is in his late teens or early 20s. He's a teenager. But then those who said he is a 30-year-old is not wrong too. He's 30-year-old too. I'm sure you're all pondering how could it be possible? You could only belong to one particular age. How can a guy have two, age? It's not true in that sense. I understand. But I told you about Faustus yesterday. Christopher Marlowe wrote Dr. Faustus from the Faust legend from Germany. So back then, during the Renaissance era, it was quite common to copy what may be called as the popular stories that's there in the work. So they largely added, and the plagiarism was not an offense back then. If they copy a legend that's known to all, that was not considered to be an offense. They could have their own adaptations to stories that are there around them. So back then, Joel, I said Faust, F-A-U-S-T, Faust legend from Germany. That's there in one of the PDFs that I had mailed you yesterday. If you can go back and have a look at it. Faust, Faust legend. It's also mentioned in that summary which I mailed you from EPG Pathshala. You may go back to that. Okay, so back then plagiarism was not a big deal. So they used to draw heavily from popular legends. So the legend of Hamlet was there from long time in varied countries. The principal one being Hamnet. Ur Hamlet. Urhamlet. Ur Hamlet. And recently, before Shakespeare, Thomas Kidd wrote a work called The Spanish Tragedy, which also has a similar plot of a son coming back and his father being murdered and the son seeking revenge. This was one of the principal elements of Renaissance tragedy. There is a revenge motive that's called revenge tragedy. So it was started by Thomas Kidd. So there is this revenge motive, father dying and the son coming to know about it, the presence of a ghost. There are plenty of elements that constitutes a Renaissance revenge tragedy. So this was a popular tale and Shakespeare adapted it. And before Shakespeare adapted it, this Hamlet legend was such that Hamlet was a teenager, someone who was close to 19, 20, 21-year old. But when Shakespeare adapted it, he brought in a lot of complexities. As we are already aware, it is one of his most longest plays. Apart from that, there were plenty of complexities involved in the plot. There is a play within a play, there is too many confusions, inaction, there is this procrastination throughout. So in order to play a complex character like Hamlet, he required someone who was versatile in terms of acting. And what Shakespeare had as one of his best actors was a man of early 30s, a man named Richard Barbage. So Shakespeare was not ready to compromise on the age factor and bring someone who is, say, a 19-year-old to play Hamlet and flop. So he wanted his best man at work. So he placed Richard Barbage at work, and at a couple of places, because otherwise the audience would say that a man of 31-year-old is playing a 19-year-old. So he hinted at a couple of places that Hamlet is close to 30-year-old. One such juncture is the gravedigger scene. In the gravedigger scene, when Hamlet meets Yorick, no, not sorry, meets the gravediggers, he has a conversation with the gravediggers. He finds a skull and asks them whose skull this is. And the gravedigger replies that it is of Yorick, who was the court jester. And they say that 30 years ago, when King Hamlet returned after a war, Prince Hamlet was born. So that is a hint. 30 years ago, when he returned, Prince Hamlet was born means the character is 30 years old or 31 years old. So there are a couple of hints dropped here and there by Shakespeare, just in case somebody questions the logicality. And that is why William Shakespeare, that's why there is this dilemma about Hamlet's age. So assuming that Hamlet is a teenager, primarily, that answers our first question. Who is Hamlet? Of course, you are again a mix of different groups, age groups, but a general MA learner would be 20, 21, 22. Who's Hamlet? Hamlet is you, just like someone pointed out. And what would you do, say at 20, 21, when you are studying abroad, you get a news that your father passed away, and for every guy, generally his father is his role model. So you come back home and you see your mother sitting in your uncle's lap, and your uncle has usurped the power. And then somebody comes and says, the ghost of your father wants to meet you. What would you feel? Hamlet experiences the same. I'm sorry. Hamlet experiences the same. And that's why he is so disturbed. And that actually accounts for his procrastinating tendencies. At that age, indecision is an attribute that we all have. Think about us writing assignments. Why should we think about revenge? Think about us writing assignments. What do? For example, March 31st is the last date. We start writing on March 27th or 28th. And then they say the deadline has been extended till April 15th. So we again stop and start writing from April 10th. We keep it for the last day. This exactly is what procrastination is all about. I'll do it tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow. And tomorrow becomes tomorrow. Yeah. So that's what happens with with Hamlet. So on that positive note, I'll take a couple of minutes break. My throat is getting so dry. I'll drink some water. In the meanwhile, I'm going to share the attendance link with you. And as I told you initially, I'm quite happy today looking at your responses. I'm also glad to see 100 people in today's class. What else could be more joyous than having a full house while teaching Hamlet? I promise you that we have an exciting session ahead. We'll discuss Hamlet in detail. This is also typical of teaching Hamlet. Okay, we said, okay, I'm going to begin. I keep saying that every 10 minutes later, and it's an hour now, and still I'd say after the 2-minute break, I'll begin with Hamlet. It's not procrastination, to be precise, but then that's the way Hamlet goes in any class. And until I began today, I was a bit skeptical about teaching Hamlet to you. There are a few students of mine who have attended my Hamlet offline before, who have crept into this class because they want to see me teach Hamlet again. I had taken an apology from them before. I told them that offline classes are different. Where I enact Hamlet, I teach them how Hamlet goes through various stages. Online, there is always a limitation. That's why I often resort to the videos. But despite that, I promise you that we have an exciting 1 hour ahead. And I'll be back in a couple of minutes. In the meanwhile, I'm sharing the link with you. We'll get started in a couple of minutes. Please be patient. It is indeed one of my favorite plays, Nitya. And you would understand why once we complete discussing Hamlet by tomorrow. And I'm sure it will become one of your most favorite plays by the time we complete the play. It's an exceptional play. There is no parallel to Hamlet. Though we can again relish while teaching Waiting for Godot, for instance. Wherever there is inactivity, wherever there is indecision, wherever there is procrastination, it calls for a lot of excitement. Simply because there is indecision, inaction. We'll come back to it in a couple of minutes. മലയാളി പ്രേക്ഷകരോട് സുരേഷ് ഗോപി പറയാറുള്ള പോലെ ദേ പോയി ദാ വന്നു. Stay tuned, guys. One more minute to fill in the particulars. All right, so let's continue, guys, from where we left. Hope you all have filled your attendance. Just in case somebody is facing some problem in filling it, somebody please help them with the same. I can see close to 80 people have filled the attendance. I'm sharing the link once again, just in case somebody couldn't find that or joined late. Please try again. I've shared the link with you. All right. So we had addressed the first question to get started with, who is Hamlet? And we'll come back to that very shortly. The second question is, when or where does the play begin? Where does the play Hamlet begin? Just in case you have read the play or you have read the read the summary. Anu Krishnan says, outside the castle of Elsno. Interesting observation. Any other answers? Where does the play begin? Because if we identify these two things, then the play becomes easy. Who is Hamlet and where does the play begin? Quite a few answers coming in the chat box. To security in duty in night and saw a ghost. A few months after the king Hamlet's death, with the guards switching their guard duty. All right, and there's another interesting observation. The play begins with the murder of King Hamlet, though that does not come on stage. All right, and the murder has indeed been a crucial element throughout the play. All right, let me put it this way. I'm not saying that this is the only possible interpretation, but this interpretation or the way of seeing the play in this manner would make it a bit more logical to you. You will be able to appreciate and understand the play better if you look at this play as starting from a particular point. You know, life is not beautiful for everyone. Especially when it comes to Hamlet's case, it was never beautiful. Hamlet, okay, again, some of you have said it begins in Denmark. Let me ask you, where did Hamlet study? Where was Hamlet studying? He was a student in Dash University. No, not France, not London. No. Yep, he was a student in Germany. He was a student in University of Wittenberg, Wittenberg. He was a student of Wittenberg. And, hello, am I not audible?
Audible, sir. Audible.
Yes, sir, you are.
All right, Tanvi, there seems to be some issue at your end. I hope I'm audible. I have charged my Bluetooth headset as well. All right, so I was trying to say that Hamlet was a student in University of Wittenberg, which is in Germany, the same university where Dr. Faustus studied, coincidentally. All right, so Hamlet was a student in University of Wittenberg. And if we treat the murder of King Hamlet as a starting point of the play, then we must also see in our mind, back then there was no mobile phone, there was no aeroplane, so there was some letter sent to Wittenberg to let the prince know that his father is no more. And the moment that prince, who is a teenager, gets to know about his father's death, what does he do? He packs his bags, he jumps into the first available ship, and he travels back to Denmark. Needless to say, it takes a few more days to travel back. Let's keep it bare minimal. Let's say 10-15 days for the letter to reach him. 10-15 days for Hamlet to travel back. Let's say 30 days or 40 days. So from the moment Hamlet comes to know about it, mind you, he's a teenager. I had given you a supposition earlier, Hamlet is you. At your age, if somebody tells you that your dad is no more and you are abroad, and the first thing that you do is you book a ticket back, a flight to your city. Apart from that, while you're traveling back, what goes through your mind? That is central to this play. As and whenever you try to answer queries of the critics regarding this play, the part I'm trying to explain right now is very significant. Imagine what all thoughts would have brooded over Hamlet's head while traveling back to Denmark from Wittenberg. Shall we list a few? While traveling back, the primary thing that affects Hamlet is, oh my God, my dad, my hero, my beloved father, he's no more. Yeah, my hero. Ever since my childhood, he is my hero. Okay, there are still people saying my audio is not clear. Am I clear, or is there some disturbances?
It's fine, sir.
Yeah, it seems to be fine, Lakshmi. Please have a look at, if there's a problem, try logging out and logging in again, because I think it could be some network issues as well. From my side, it's fine. Yeah. So first of all, he'd be pondering over his father's memories, and he would be thinking about the nostalgic past ever from his childhood. Oh, my father, he was my hero, and I loved him so much, and I would never be able to see him again. Yeah, never be able to see him again. I'll be never able to listen to his sound again. He'll never hug me again. And he was quite healthy when I left Denmark to Wittenberg. So what happened all of a sudden? That's another thing that Hamlet thinks. Mind you, that needs to be verified later. So he mourns his father's death. At the same time, he is clueless as to how his father, who was quite healthy, died all of a sudden. So death is sudden and shocking. The second thought that would come to Hamlet's mind immediately is, oh, my mother. How would she take the sudden demise? I'm also not there with her. Yeah? If she has to fall on someone's shoulder and cry. അല്ലേ നമ്മൾ മലയാളത്തിൽ പറയുമ്പോൾ എൻ്റെ അച്ഛൻ മരിച്ചുപോയി അമ്മ ആരുടെ നെഞ്ചത്ത് വെച്ച് ഏങ്ങലടിച്ച് കരയും ഇനി വല്ല കടുങ്ങയും കാണിച്ചാലോ അമ്മ what if she does something stupid what if she commits suicide my father was so beloved and so dear to her how would she take the sudden departure will she be able to bear that and I'm not there with her at this point of time 15 days have passed by and 15 more has to pass by so he'll be crying and praying that her mother stays alive so that he can go to Denmark and the moment he lands there, he expects that his mother would come running all over to him, hug him and mourn his father's death. Yeah? She's such a virtuous lady, he says, who is devoted to his father alone. You see the irony, don't you? Then, the third major thought that would come to Hamlet is, oh God, this death is so sudden. Which all that I, a teenager, the moment I go back to my place, apart from consoling my mother, apart from coming to terms myself with my father's departure, I have to take this huge responsibility of ruling my nation. I have to bear the responsibility of ruling the nation. I have to be the next king. So again, he ponders the possibilities. My father was a great king, was a great ruler, loved by everybody in the nation. Will I ever be able to meet those expectations? Would I be able to fill in those shoes, those large shoes of my father? So there are plenty of such thoughts that Hamlet is brooding over while he's traveling from Germany to Denmark. And what happens when Hamlet lands in in Denmark? Mind you, the play technically begins when the two security guards are talking to each other. I'll come back to that in a short while. But Hamlet, who is the protagonist, comes 2 acts later or 2 scenes later. And when Hamlet makes his appearance, he is seen coming to the court, to the royal court. So what happens the moment he lands from the ship? Hamlet is confused, he is baffled, he is surprised. Because the moment he lands in Denmark, he is expecting a sort of mourning environment. MOURNING, ഒരു വിലപിക്കുന്ന അവസ്ഥ, ദുഃഖാചരണം. He is expecting all the streets filled in black and black, people crying for their lost king. But instead what he sees a Denmark which is in festive mood, full swing festive mood. He's confused. Am I not in Denmark? Captain, did you drop me somewhere else? Is this not my Denmark? These people are celebrating. How come? What happened? So he's confused. He goes to the royal palace. He goes to the court. He is dressed in black because he's mourning his father's death. അല്ലെ, നമ്മളൊരു മരണത്തിന് പോകുമ്പോൾ ആരും പച്ചയും മഞ്ഞയും നിറവിട്ട് പോകില്ലല്ലോ, കളർഫുൾ ആയിട്ട് റെയിൻബോ കളറിൽ പോകില്ല. So he's mourning his father's death. He's clothed in black. And a young Hamlet who is a teenager goes to the court, and the very first sight that he gets, he's shattered. What does he see there? Anybody who has read the play or the summary or seen the short, what does Hamlet see at the court? What is the first sight that Hamlet gets?
His mother sitting on Claudius' lap.
Exactly, Amala, spot on. The moment Hamlet enters the court, he sees his uncle, that is Claudius, seated in the throne where his father once royally reigned. You know that royal throne, which was so fortunate to have his father's, but his uncle is placed in that throne where Hamlet had to be seated right now. But that's still fine. But what shocks Hamlet further is, like I told you, while he was traveling back, he would have imagined, oh, my mother, how would she survive without me? On whose shoulders would she weep? The first sight that Hamlet has is his uncle sitting on the throne and his mother seated in his uncle's lap, and both of them laughing at some crude joke. Hamlet is shattered. It's like if the earth splits into two right now and have me in, I'll be the happiest person on earth. Won't you feel the same at your age? To see your mom in someone else's lap, it's a sexual innuendo, mind you, it's a sexual imagery. Sitting in your uncle's lap, your mom is laughing barely few days into your father's death. Hamlet is shattered. അങ്ങ് ഇല്ലാണ്ടായി Hamlet. എൻ്റെ അമ്മയോ, my mother, how come she stooped to such levels? That's where the first soliloquy comes into place. But before we go to that soliloquy, let me just try to finish the scene. That doesn't end there. The shock of Hamlet does not end there. The moment Hamlet enters the court, he sees that his throne is lost to his uncle and his mother is sitting in his uncle's lap. He's shattered. And then they see Hamlet. His mother stands up and says, oh, Hamlet, have you come? Where have you been, my son? And tries to pretend to be crying. And before she moves, the uncle, Claudius, seated at the throne, looks at Hamlet, and there is a single line question that he throws at Hamlet. Go back to your study material, go back to the textbook if possible, and read that. What does Hamlet say? So what does Claudius say? Oh Hamlet, my son, you have come. Why are you clothed in black? പിന്നെ എൻ്റെ അച്ഛൻ മരിച്ചിട്ട് ഞാൻ ഇവിടെ കിടന്ന് ഡാൻസ് കളിക്കും. Yeah, my dad has passed away. I'll dance, right? The stupid uncle asks, why are you clothed in black? ആരാ ചത്തെ? Hamlet is raging in fury. He can't take this. He's confused. He is really hoping that let this be a nightmare. Let this not be true. I'm in that ship and I'm watching some nightmare in my sleep. And look at that word. Hi Hamlet, my son. Ende mone, mere beta. Hamlet is like, panna mone, dash mone. Yeah. My dad was a genius, was a legend. How dare you sit in that throne and call me your son? But then Claudius does not leave any blanks. The second line of Hamlet. Don't worry, my son. I'll always be there to guide you. And after me isn't this throne for you. So he closes that wall. He says, I am the emperor from here on. And after I die, in the Shavatinde America, you can accede to this throne. Just go back to that traveling phase. 3 questions. 1, my dad is no more. I grieve for him. And how come he died so suddenly? 2, who would my mother go to cry? Would she do something silly? 3, how would I, such a young guy, take such a severe duty like ruling Denmark? All 3 things shattered. But the first question is somewhat answered. Hamlet suspects some foul. He believes that his father's death may not be natural. There is something unnatural about his father's death. He believes something, he suspects something, but he doesn't have any proof. He's confused. He goes back to his chamber. And there comes the first soliloquy. What is the first soliloquy? It is nothing but an outrage at his mother's act. He says, for Niobe, he draws the Greek mythology. He says Niobe, when her husband died, cried for months, thereby creating a river out of her tears. And this lady, as if growing appetite had swallowed her, as if fleshly desires had overcome her. And he ends it up by saying, frailty, thy name is woman. Such a severe accusation. So many critics look at it from a feminist angle and say this is misogynist. Frailty, weakness, your name is woman. You fall for or you succumb to your fleshly desires. Say 10, 20, 30 days into your husband's death, you need another guy. This, നമ്മൾ മലയാളത്തിൽ പറയില്ലേ, ഭർത്താവ് മരിച്ച് 10 ദിവസം കഴിഞ്ഞില്ല, അതിനുള്ള അവൾക്ക് മറ്റൊരുത്തന്റെ ചൂട് വേണ്ടി വന്നു. Yeah, she can't bear for a few more days. At least she could have pretended grief for some more days, for the society's sake. So Hamlet bursts out in that first soliloquy. He leaves no stone unturned. He says, frailty, thy name is woman. Gertrude, what you did is unjust. The young Hamlet cannot take it at all. Now, before we move to the next act, let's quickly go back to the opening scene of the play. What happens in the opening scene? Let's spend a minute watching that, and we'll continue with the session. This is from one of the most popular movie enactments of Hamlet by Laurence Olivier in the year 1948. I do know that this is a movie adaptation, but then this serves as an exemplary starting point for us. The clock strikes 12 at midnight. and the new guard comes to assume charge.
Who's there? Hey, answer me. Stand and unfold yourself.
Long live the king.
See, because he is not sure whether it's the other guard or whether it's the ghost. The ghost has been coming for the last few days. So we are all scared of ghosts, aren't we? So that accounts for that. Who's that? Answer and then move.
King.
Bernardo,
He.
you come most carefully upon your hour.
It's now struck 12. Get me to bed, Francisco.
For this relief, much thanks.
See, for this relief, much thanks. What relief? For relieving me from the horror of watching a ghost again and again. I'm glad that you come exactly at 12, which is your duty time. You're not late. I'm thankful to you.
The cold. I'm sick at heart.
Have you had quiet guard?
See, have you had quiet guard means, was it peaceful? Or did you see some ghost? Did you have a peaceful watch?
And the most stirring.
Well, good night. You meet Horatio and Marcellus, the rivals of my watch. Bid them make haste.
I think I hear him. And who's there?
Prince in this ground, and liegeman to the Dane.
Give me a good night.
Farewell, honest soldier. Who has relieved you?
Bernardo at my place. Give you a good night.
Hello, Bernardo. Good night.
Look at the vocabulary, the choice of vocabulary. Has this thing appeared again tonight? They are referring to the apparition of ghosts. And mind you, back then they believed in evil spirits too. So there are good spirits and evil spirits. So if a spirit seems like the deceased king, it needn't be the king. It can be a foul spirit. So that's why they are referring to it as, has this creature appeared again tonight?
I've seen nothing.
Horatio says 'tis but our fantasy, and will not let belief take hold of him touching this dreaded sight twice seen of us. Therefore I've entreated him along with us to watch the minutes of this night, that if again this apparition comes, he may approve our eyes and speak to it.
Tash, 'twill not appear.
Now please also note another thing there. For 2 days, they have seen the ghost, or the apparition to be specific. But then the ghost did not talk to them. Even the ghost is elitist. I would speak to people who are only of my elite level. I don't talk to these guards and wards and all, right? The ghost won't speak to the guards. The guards do not know the royal language. They bring Horatio in because Horatio is a scholar. But you would see that the ghost does not speak much to Horatio. The only thing that the ghost tells him is, I want to talk to Hamlet.
Sit down a while. Let us once again.
So let's just reassess that scene and proceed from there. So what happens in that scene? In that opening scene, to be precise. What did we just see?
The guards see the ghost of the king.
Yep.
And they said the matter to Horatio, but he says that it is just a fancy of them. And when he came to there, he also see the ghost. And he believed it.
Exactly. So what happens in that scene is that for the last 2 days, an apparition was visible to the guards. We use that word apparition pretty conveniently. An apparition, a rubab, yeah, some sort of a design which resembles the king, the dead king, is being seen. And the guards are not sure whether it's a king or an evil spirit, so they take Horatio there. And Horatio confirms that it looks like a king. Again, not sure. It doesn't speak, mind you. At the moment Hamlet lands in Denmark, goes to the court and gets back to his chamber and completes his soliloquy, he meets Horatio. Horatio comes to meet Hamlet. And what does Horatio tell him? Horatio tells him that I have something for you. Don't panic. There is something, an apparition like your father, seen. I'm sorry. Seen at the gate by the guards. And I also saw that. So I would like you to come with us and see to it if it is your father. Just imagine that situation. At your teenage, you have lost your father. You didn't get what is legally supposed to be yours. And then your best friend comes to you and says, your dad's ghost is seen. Please come with me. Would you go? Would you dare go? But Hamlet does. Hamlet does so because he has that much of a regard for his father. And while he was traveling back, he was so sad that he could never listen to his father's voice once again, that charismatic voice. He'll never be able to see his father animated again. He'll never be able to hug his father again. So the prospect of seeing his father again, no matter whether it's a ghost or an apparition, excites Hamlet. So despite his fears, he goes with Horatio to meet his father's ghost. Clock strikes 12. The ghost makes its entry. Both the guards and Horatio warn Hamlet not to go with the ghost. The ghost asks Hamlet to follow him to a lonely place. It says that, it has to say something secretive. So it can't be disclosed in front of the guards and Horatio. So it asks Hamlet to follow him. And Hamlet does, neglecting the warnings from Horatio and the guards. They are justified by the warning because it could be an evil spirit. It could kill the prince or harm the prince. But then Hamlet follows them. Hamlet follows the ghost. He's like, oh, Papa. And he goes like this, yeah, tell me, Papa, what have you to tell me? And he follows the ghost. And what does the ghost tell him? The ghost makes a revelation. The ghost says, I am your father's ghost. And I came to tell you that my death was an unnatural death. I was murdered by your uncle by pouring poison into my ears. Please remember this. Your uncle poured poison into my ears, thereby murdering him or assassinating him. And then the ghost speaks the most significant thing that dominates the play. What does the ghost say? Avenge your father's death. Blood upon blood. Revenge my murder. Hamlet is terrified. Just imagine at your teenage, you come back to your home and your father's ghost comes to you and gives you a gun and says, go shoot your uncle. Your hands might be trembling out of fear. Hamlet is in the same state. He's confused, he's perplexed, he's furious, he's angry, he has his agonies. And at that small age, at that small head, it is a heavy task vested by the ghost in Hamlet's shoulders. Kill thy uncle and take revenge. But despite that shock, Hamlet asks the father, should I kill my mother too? What about my mother? And the ghost says, let her alone. Her life is her punishment. craftfully look through those lines. He says, kill Claudius, let your mother live a widow. That's the biggest punishment that you can give her. And the ghost vanishes into thin air. Now, before proceeding any further, let's build on the base that we have set so far. You are a teenager and your dad is no more and you have come back. So when your dad is no more, whose shoulders would you bank upon? We are all human beings. We are social beings. We cannot live in isolation. We need somebody, at least one person, to cling on to. So your dad, your hero, your favorite is no more. Who's the next go-to person for you? It's your mom. So you go to your mom and hug her, cry, and get relieved. But the moment Hamlet makes his entry, the moment he steps into the court, that prospect is closed. His mother is with his uncle, and Hamlet suspects foul. He can't go to his mother and cry. Even when the ghost makes a revelation, he cannot go to his mother and cry because Hamlet does not know whether his mother has a hand in the conspiracy or not. There are definitely various perspectives to that. There are people who say Hamlet's mother had no idea about Claudius murdering King Hamlet. And then there are people who say Gertrude knew that her husband would be killed by Claudius, though she did not have any part in that. She did not help him kill her husband. So there are different versions to it, to which we shall come back tomorrow. But then, speaking about shoulders to rest on, shoulders to cry on, shoulders to depend on, Hamlet does not have his father. His mother is now someone else. His best friend is the other person he can go to. But because the ghost forbids Hamlet to not let the secret to anybody else, Hamlet can't share this with Horatio. Yeah? Hamlet in the Gedigged Aloikane. At that such a young age, he is surrounded by a serious secret and a serious responsibility which he cannot share with anybody. His father is no more. His mother is now with someone else. His friend cannot be revealed his truth. So at that age, as a teenager, I'm sorry, let me just drink a bit of water. At that age, as a teenager, who would you then rush to? Who's your go-to fellow at that age, as a teenager? Who would you depend upon? Who would you trust to say anything?
Friends?
Who would you go to? A friend is done. Horatio, best friend. You cannot tell it to him. Come on, a young teenager, a prince. Yeah, of course.
Girlfriend.
Of course, girlfriend. Why not? So the moment after he meets the ghost, he's horrified with his responsibility. He's kind of in mixed emotion states. His hair is like this. Yeah. And with that shape, he walks into Ophelia's closet. By closet, do not imagine the cuckoos, the toilet. Back then, the word closet meant chamber, bedroom. So Ophelia's chamber or bedroom is where Hamlet rushes to. Because that's where he thought he could find some relief. Maybe he thought he could share this with his girlfriend, who's probably his fiancée. But looking at a frantic Hamlet walking into her bedroom with a sort of rage that he was having, the fury that he was having, Ophelia gets scared or shocked and she rushes out all at once. And because she is a 16-year-old girl, an immature girl, she does not know how to handle the situations. She does something that no logical being would do. What does she do? She rushes to her father and she tells him that Prince Hamlet, my lover, has come to my bedroom And because he is looking frantic, I'm afraid he'll do something harmful to me. Polonius is surprised because so far he is not aware of this relationship between his daughter and the prince. So in order to convince his father that the prince loves him, Ophelia does another stupid thing. She brings in all the gifts and letters that Prince Hamlet had written to her. Yeah? How interesting, isn't it? Generally, it's the other way around. The father or the brother discovers your love letter and problems sleeping. But then, in this case, Ophelia takes all those letters to her father. And the letters, to be precise, make quite sense. Those letters expose the romantic side of Hamlet. Later, after Ophelia's death, post the gravedigger scene, when Hamlet has a feud with her brother Laertes, Hamlet says something of this sort. Perhaps that's there in the letter as well. He says, doubt thou the stars are fire, doubt that the sun doth move, doubt truth to be a liar, but never doubt I love. See how romantic. Doubt the stars are made of fire, doubt the sun moves, doubt truth to be a liar, but never doubt my love for you. How romantic. But then Ophelia gives these letters to her father. And resultantly, Polonius goes through this. Go back to the materials, go back to the textbook, and look at Polonius' response. Sony Abraham, I think it is stuck because of the network error from your side. From my end, it seems to be clear. Maybe because we are having a 2-hour session, there is some network issues over there. From my end, I hope this is quite clear, and I don't think there is an issue. I have logged in from my mobile as well as my laptop today. So when you say there is no sound, that's what I do. I go back to the laptop, I try to listen myself through my other headphone, and it seems to be okay. All right, so the moment he reads these letters, the response of Polonius is typical dad-like. He looks at it and he says, I, Hamlet, who is what Polonius says. Yeah, who Hamlet? Are Hamlet who? Because he's no longer the king, he's no longer the prince. Yeah, Polonius is wise and he is aware of the fact that Hamlet won't become a king any sooner. So he disapproves, like any other father, of his daughter's alliance with Hamlet. So seeing his lover rushing to her father, Hamlet's that possibility is also closed. No father, no mother, no best friend Horatio, now no Ophelia. He simply has nobody to bank on. Look at that miserable state. What do you expect such a guy to do? Where else could he find some reliability upon? So fortunately or unfortunately, he doesn't have anybody else to bank upon. He is confused and he's stuck. And that's why he puts in an antic disposition. What is an antic disposition? A feigned madness. He feigns to be mad. He feigns to have lost his senses over his dad's death. He appears to be sane at one point and insane at the other point. He confuses people deliberately. But then if you read through the play, you can see that Hamlet is actually not mad. He's sane. But then when it comes to people like Polonius, Claudius, sometimes his mother, he appears to be mad, in an attempt to cheat them. Because someone who's mad can do anything, can even murder the king. So Hamlet feigns or pretends to be mad. Then, in that sequence, father, mother, sister, best friend, then come friends. So thus comes Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, two of his friends from Germany, Wittenberg. The moment he sees them, he's happy. He is open-hearted and he goes to hug them. Oh, come on, I'm so happy to have you here. And he plans to reveal his plans with them, to share the burden with them. But within a couple of minutes of conversation with them, Hamlet suspects something unnatural. Because the friends are not behaving as they generally behave with him. There is something unnatural, right? Friends don't have a formal air. But Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are putting in some disposition. So why so? So Hamlet pretends some seriousness and he questions his friends. And they confess. They confess that it is King Claudius who has brought them here. And he has asked them to find out what is in Hamlet's mind. So again, Hamlet pretends to be mad. And in between all this, there are so many things happening. Polonius sends Ophelia to Hamlet to find out what's in his mind. And Hamlet again blabbers. In the meanwhile, his mother, coming to know that Hamlet is out of his mind, calls him to her chamber. Then the arrasque scene or screen scene takes place. Polonius hides behind the screen and tries to listen to their conversation. And what happens? Mistaking Polonius to be Claudius, Hamlet stabs Polonius, who's behind the screen. He says, rats, 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 rats everywhere. Because Hamlet is mad. Hamlet can pretend that he heard rats cry and he killed Polonius. He thought it's Claudius though. But the moment he killed and looked behind the curtain, he was shocked. Because it was Polonius. Mind you, before this, there were a few opportunities to kill Claudius which Hamlet didn't. For example, once while Hamlet was passing through the chapel, he saw Claudius pray, kneeling and praying. He could have stabbed him to death, but he didn't, because if somebody is killed while praying, he would go to heaven. Hamlet did not want his father's murderer to go to heaven. So similarly, thinking that Claudius was behind the screen, he stabbed Polonius, who is his girlfriend's father, mind you. So Hamlet is shocked. At the extreme of his feigned madness, he abuses Ophelia, saying, "Get thee to a nunnery." Another instance of misogyny in that play. Get thee to a nunnery. Go become a nun or a prostitute. I don't want you. I disown you. I don't want you to be my lover. But he says that out of the rage, and also because he's not sure. Because he has a huge responsibility of avenging the king by murdering him. So he's not sure if he can fulfill the promise of love. So he denounces her. But somehow, Ophelia cannot take it. She's 16 years old. And she dies drowning. She's lost. After her father's death, she completely goes mad. And she gets drowned in the river and she dies. Meanwhile, Hamlet has gone in exile. Actually, the king sent him with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to England. And he has written a note saying that kill this guy the moment he lands in England. But Hamlet reads that note and he leaves Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to die and he escapes. And he comes back to Denmark. Then he has to confirm this. So before that, he has this mousetrap play enacted. There are a group of players who come to Denmark. He asks them to enact the play Mousetrap. So in Mousetrap, what happens is, in Mousetrap, there is the same story of a king being murdered by pouring poison into the ears by his nephew. And eventually, Hamlet asks Horatio to observe Claudius and his reaction when the scene is enacted. Hamlet plays along with Ophelia back then. He tries to be childful, innuendos, and he tries to be perversive. And the moment that scene is enacted where the king is being murdered, they observe that Claudius is disturbed and he walks out. So this confirms Hamlet's suspicion and the ghost statement that Claudius had murdered King Hamlet. So after this, all these things happen. Polonius is stabbed to death. Ophelia commits suicide, and Hamlet had to, seek refuge and come back to Denmark in exile. So while Hamlet and Horatio are in hiding, while they were walking, they reached the grave-diggers' place. So it's a graveyard where there are so many bodies being buried. So they reach the grave-diggers' place. Hamlet looks at various skulls in that graveyard. He takes a skull and has a look at it in a reflecting manner. That often becomes the cover page of most of the Hamlet books. So Hamlet has a look at that skeleton, that skull, and he asks the gravediggers whose skull this is. To which the gravediggers reply, it is Yorick's skull, Yorick. Yorick was the clown, the jester in King Hamlet's court. So while young Hamlet was a child, it was Yorick who used to take care of him. കൊച്ചു ഹാംലെറ്റിനെ ചെറുപ്പത്തിൽ കളിപ്പിച്ചുകൊണ്ട് നടന്ന ഒരു ക്ലൗൺ ആയിരുന്നു, ഒരു വിദൂഷകനായിരുന്നു Yorick എന്ന് പറയും. So Hamlet looks at Yorick in a reminiscent manner, and he feels that our life is an ephemeral one. We all are born and we must die. Pre-anticipating Godome. We are all born, we have to suffer this life and we have to die, which is an eternal truth. And then a procession is seen to be coming to the graveyard. So Hamlet and Horatio go into hiding. And they ask whose body is being bought, and they say it's of a young lady, a young girl. And the moment it reaches the graveyard, Hamlet shockingly figures out that it is his love, Ophelia. That's where he comes into his senses. Even though he's pretending to be mad most of the times, when the real occasion arrives, he proves again and again that he's sane. At once he rushes to Ophelia and he starts crying. By keeping everybody apart, he falls at her feet and starts weeping for her loss. Then Laertes, her brother, who has at once lost his father as well as his sister, starts a duel with Hamlet. And Hamlet repartees Laertes by saying, the love of 1,000 brothers put together cannot match my love for Ophelia. Look at the lover in Hamlet. Look at the romantic in Hamlet. He says, ആയിരം ചേട്ടന്മാരുടെ സ്നേഹം കൂട്ടി വെച്ചാൽ പോലും എനിക്ക് ഒഫീലിയോടുള്ള പ്രേമത്തിന് പകരാകും. हजारों भाइयों के प्यार ले लो, तब भी मेरे प्यार के बराबर नहीं हो सकता. Look at the visionary that Hamlet is. And then the king intervenes, and cunningly Claudius says that let's not make a scene here, let's bury Ophelia in an honorable manner. And because you both have your own reasons to fight each other, let's have a royal fight at a different date. So very cleverly, Claudius matches a fight between Laertes and Hamlet. And Claudius wants to kill Hamlet, so he poisons Laertes' sword. The battle ensues. And just in case Hamlet didn't die of the sword, Claudius had mixed poison in the drink and kept it for Hamlet. But as the battle ensues, we can see that even though Laertes stabs Hamlet here and there in the arms and all, it takes time for Hamlet to die. In the meanwhile, Gertrude consumes that poison and she dies. That leads to the inevitable end of Claudius, And after having stabbed Claudius to death, Hamlet also bids goodbye to the world. Laritus apologizes to Hamlet for using the poisoned sword against him. So by the time the play ends, almost all the principal characters, beginning from King Hamlet, it's a procession of death. Claudius, Gertrude, Hamlet, Ophelia, everybody die by the time the play comes to an end. It's a play of death. But then finally the mission is accomplished. The revenge has been taken. Claudius has been murdered by Hamlet, stabbed by Hamlet. And that's how the play comes to an end. So tomorrow when we discuss the play, the theoretical notions attached to the play, the primary thing that you need to keep in mind is that Hamlet is a youngster, a teenager. So procrastination does not, procrastination is an attribute of ours. And especially at that age, when such a huge responsibility like revenge is vested on your shoulders, it's natural for you to procrastinate. Yep. So that somewhat sums up the story for you. And I can promise you that this version of a story may not be available to you elsewhere. I've been fortunate to get this perspective because of the good teachers who have taught me, like Dr. K. Ayyappa Panikar, Dr. V.C. Harris, Dr. Madhukar Rao, and so on. They were such legendary teachers. And I'm just a marathon runner carrying their baton in my life. You may sometimes continue the marathon from me, possibly. So as we conclude the day, there are quite a few things that's missed in between. And it was in between all this chaos that Hamlet says, to be or not to be, that is the question. He contemplates suicide. But he doesn't do that because as per the Christian mythology, suicide is a sin. He wants to go to heaven. So that's one reason why he doesn't commit suicide. And on a closing note, there are a few dialogues that I missed out in between, to which I shall come back tomorrow. At least for Hamlet, you would get some help. Other plays cannot be dealt in that detail. So please bear with me on that regard. And okay, I take the classics also tomorrow. So sorry we didn't have so much time for today, but still if you have any query, we have 3 to 4 minutes. The floor is declared open and I'm going back to my laptop. Thank you. So learners, if you have any queries,
Thank you,
I'm
sir.
going to share the links with you as well. Please don't go away. I'm going to share the links with you too. Sharing again, just in case you missed out on marking your attendance, I'm sharing the link of the attendance sheet. I'm also sharing the link of the movie made by Laurence Olivier on Hamlet. We also have a spectacular performance at the Globe Theatre last year by the Globus Hamlet. I'm sharing the play version with you as well. You may go back to that. And apart from that, yeah, there is one more thing I'd like to share with you before I leave the floor open for questions. Maybe we can take 5 more minutes for that. Let me just try to share the screen with you and show you a PDF. It's available in BOK, just in case you want to go download that. The best part of downloading PDFs from BOK is that you get to read the introductions. This is Hamlet's annotated version by Burton Raphael with an essay by Harold Bloom. So in this, if you scroll through the initial pages, there is a 16-page introduction written. Yeah, and that introduction can serve for a better understanding about Hamlet. It tells you a lot about Hamlet, the way he behaves, and so on and on and on. There are plenty of books which has these sort of introductions, which would give you different perspectives on Hamlet, apart from reading the original play. So this is the original play's paraphrased work, and you can see that Act 1 here. Have a look at this. Bernardo, who's there? Nay, answer me, stand and unfold yourself. for all those Malayalis who have watched the movie Manichitrathal. Yeah, it's just like that scene where Innocent uses his umbrella and says, Raghavo, Arada, Paranetta, Payamadi, and that same scene, you know. Who's there? Stand and unfold means stand and reveal. Who are you? Yeah. So that's what they do there. So you can read the original version if you want. There are paraphrased editions available in BOK. I'm just showing that again. Sharing another tab if you can see that. No, just a second. I think I have to go to the home again. Just give me a second. It takes a bit of time to buffer. Just a second. Hamlet will take you to, yeah. This is the book that I showed you, Burton Raphael. You can look at 4 tragedies by Bantam Classics. There is this manga edition, which is the illustrative classic. You have Harold Bloom's critical edition, and on and on and on. The introductions would definitely be of some help to you. All right. So that somewhat sums up the day for us. There are still major points to be discussed, to which we shall come back tomorrow. If you have any queries, we'll definitely take it. Thank you so much, Nitya. I do love that acting part when it comes to Hamlet, but again, I'd like to say that in an apologetic manner, this is nothing. When it comes to offline classes, we do enact these scenes, the soliloquies and all, and we try to have a feel of the play Hamlet. Because this is online, I had my own limitations to enact those scenes. But otherwise, there is definitely a lot of theatricality to Hamlet. Maybe some other day, when these COVID subsides, we can meet somewhere and have the offline enactment of Hamlet. Definitely. So if you have any queries, we shall definitely take that as well. And to be very frank, Satyendra, my Hindi is not that good. I've studied Hindi from my 1st standard to 5th standard. And I watch movies. That's the only base for me as far as Hindi is concerned. But still, thank you for the compliment. If you have any queries, we'll take that and we'll